A judgment of about 3 hours on Friday, sitting in Saldanha Bay, the Western Cape High Court, and Judge Nathan Erasmus finding Kelly Smith, her boyfriend Jacqueline Apollos, and friend Steveno van Rijn guilty of kidnapping and human trafficking of Kelly Smith's daughter, the 6-year-old Joshlin Smith. Remember, she went missing in Saldanha Bay in February last year. But this judgment all hinging on the testimony of state witness Laurentia Lombard, but also that of an evangelist, Nico Kutsia, who overheard Kelly Smith discussing selling a child for, his testimony was here, 20,000 Rand or 5,000 Rand if needed. He overheard her say it was a case that presented 30 witnesses. But what was interesting is Kelly Smith and the other co-accused decided not to take the stand. Here's the judgment by Judge Nathan Erasmus.
So for the reasons that I have stated, I'm of the view that the state succeeded in proving the guilt of Mr. Apollos, Mr. van Rijn, Ms. Smith, on the main count in count 1 and on count 2. So the following order is issued. You may remain seated. On count 1, you are guilty of a contravention of section 4.1 of the Act, read with the other legislation on trafficking in persons in relation to Joshlin Smith. On count 2, you are also convicted of kidnapping.
Of course, then afterwards, applause in the Saldanha Community Hall, the venue for the Western Cape High Court. The case now then resumes on the 9th of May for sentencing procedures. But despite a triumphing court for the community, the question still remains, where is Joshlin Smith? Joining me now on the line, Deon Pool, advocate, former magistrate. Good morning, Deon. Really appreciate your time. What is quite significant about this case is that it could be seen as precedent-setting, especially since a victim has not been recovered. Also, there's been a conviction with and I'll be very crude here, a buyer when it comes to a human trafficking case, isn't it, Deon?
Good morning, Lester. Can you hear me?
I can hear you clearly.
Thank you. Yes, it's one of those cases where it is unfortunate that the child has not yet been found. However, this appears to be par for the course in these kind of matters, specifically when children are sold to these Muti traditional healer rings. It's a very insidious environment, and these rings span across our borders into Africa, and it's unfortunately one of those situations where we will more than likely never know to whom this child was eventually handed to, and what would have happened to the child, except to possibly contemplate the worst.
Just how was the court able to prove a case of human trafficking if, again, to be crude, if a buyer was not identified? It was put forward to the court under the evidence of a state witness, Laurentia Lombard, saying that Kelly Smith sold her a child to a believed Sangoma for tens of thousands of rands. Again, another a witness, Nico Kutsia, also he says he overheard discussing the seller of the child. So you have the seller, which is Kelly Smith in this case, but we don't have, again to be crude, a buyer. So how was the court able and the prosecution able to put forward this case, which the court ultimately accepted?
I have to understand Judge Erasmus's judgment. And from what I have been able to piece together out of the news reports, I haven't seen his judgment particularly yet. It would be more than likely be out today. It appears that the judge took the evidence holistically, in the sense that he made certain averments or certain inferences from the evidence in light of the circumstances that, in his view, supported a decision or a finding that there was a beyond reasonable doubt explanation as to what had happened. And then, of course, took into consideration the fact that the accused did, to one extent or another, present evidence. The cross-examination of those witnesses was evidence, and more particularly, I noticed that the judge took the view that it's not explained why the mother of this child, her actions at the time that the child supposedly went missing, simply just were not reasonable under the circumstances.
Yeah.
And all of those issues, that which she told everybody, her conduct afterwards, the conduct of the other two accused, all of that brought to bear a situation which he found supported the evidence that the child had been trafficked, i.e. either given to somebody or sold to somebody, or something in that sense, because the act is rather broad in as far as the transaction is concerned. It doesn't have to include money per se.
Yeah.
But the judge seems to have taken a view that the circumstantial evidence pointed in that one direction and that direction only.
Yes, Judge Nathan Erasmus ruling that there was an exchange, and some of his quotes here, sold like a commodity, meaning that he believes that this met the legal threshold for a charge and a conviction of kidnapping and trafficking. We now go to the sentencing part of this case. Sentencing procedures expected to start on the 9th of May. Various reports, including the Burger, the Sunday Times, reporting on interviews with the grandparents of Joshlin Smith, who have told reporters that Kelly, while not willing to testify in the trial part of this case, but looks to be willing to testify in mitigation of sentencing. What we're looking at when it comes to sentences in this particular case for human trafficking charge, and what could Kelly Smith bring to this case to mitigate in a sentencing procedure, which I believe could carry a life imprisonment sentence?
Yes, the Act prescribes a minimum sentence of life. In other words, the judge has to find substantive and compelling reasons that justify a lesser sentence. Now, in as far as her personal circumstances are concerned, those will be taken into account. Of course, we don't know what prompted this act to traffic this child. That will be something that needs to be explained in order to get the court, to a certain extent, to have some sympathy with her. And then, of course, the other aspect is there are only 3 people apparently who know where this child is, or what would have happened to this child, or whom this child might have been sold to, in the event that the child had been sold.
Would it be too late, sorry, Deon, would it be too late to cut some sort of deal in mitigation of sentence if Kelly Smith says, well, I'll be willing to give more detail in where I believe Joshlin Smith could be?
She wouldn't necessarily be able to cut a deal with the state, but it will be something that the court will take into consideration, given the fact that this is still an ongoing case. The fact that Joshlin has not yet been found or identified, the case is still open for all intents and purposes. And as you rightly intimated at the start, is that we don't have a buyer. And more particularly, we'd like to know what happened to this child. And those aspects are things that would quite possibly count in her favor at the end of the day, to the extent that she's willing to make this information available. And then, of course, be able to identify possible accomplices apart from the two that she's been convicted with. And it will weigh very heavily against her in the sense that she does not kind of fall on her sword, take responsibility for the instance, at least to the extent to advise the court and to give the information that is pertinent to this child.
Deon Pool, really appreciate your time, advocate and former magistrate.